Hello, this is your favorite doctor of education. My channel is called Take the Meat, Spit Out the Bones. I will be sharing education research that has tons of meat, but you may find some bones in the message. Just throw those aside and focus on the meat of the video's message. So today we will be discussing co-teaching, the positives to co-teaching. All right, some of you may not know what actually co-teaching is, so I have here on my screen. Co-teaching is a collaborative approach to instruction in which two teachers, typically a general education teacher and a special education teacher, work together to plan and then implement instruction for a class that includes students with disabilities. This can benefit not only the students with disabilities, but all the students who are having difficulty with or understanding an assignment or content or instruction or anything, right? Curriculum. Co-teaching is the most common method of delivering specially designed instruction to students with disabilities in the least restrictive environment. So actually, this definition came from the Council for Exceptional Children. It came on their webpage. And then, co-teaching also can look like, a general educator and a service provider, like a speech teacher, could be an E&L teacher. It could be a OT, PT are pushing into a classroom with students with disabilities. Also, some people may even consider having a paraprofessional or a teaching assistant in the room could also be considered co-teaching, right? So, and also you have some classes where there's two general educators in the classroom. So oftentimes when you think about co-teaching, they're often saying that there's a general educator and a special educator in the classroom teaching students with disabilities and students without disabilities, right? So the thing is that, and then in the definition, it said specially designed instruction. So if you're not familiar with that, please look that up. But specially designed instruction is basically individualized instruction for students with disabilities that give them access to the curriculum, the general education curriculum, that also is attuned to the child's disability. So their disability label. It could be learning disability, emotional disturbance or emotional disability, or speech or language impairment, autism spectrum disorder. So they have to teach to the child's disability, but then also give them access to the general education curriculum. So something that they said, the least restrictive environment. So I don't know if you know what that is, but in special education, you have a placement continuum. You have a continuum of services. So when a child gets put into special education, the team comes up with a placement, the so-called the right placement for the child. So this is the least restrictive. Will be a general education teacher has a consultant teacher talk to them about how to, teach the child's IEP, the IEP goals, or accommodate the child, modify the classroom for that child. To the most restrictive, where you see home and hospital, where children who may be medically fragile getting instruction in the home or hospital. I actually have done that. I've done pretty much almost every single placement on special education. So ICT, that's called integrated co-teaching. ICT, or it can be seen as CTT, collaborative team teaching, or it can be seen as a co-taught class, a team teaching class, depending on where you are. But that is, like the definition said, a general education teacher, a special ed teacher in the classroom together, instructing students with disabilities and students without disabilities. So depending on your school or school district, there may be a ratio where you have a certain number of students with disabilities. Like, say, for instance, a particular state may say you can't have any more than 12 students with disabilities in a co-taught class, right? But oftentimes, we don't know if that happens. Those rules may not be followed. Okay, so that is how co-teaching is. It kind of falls almost in the middle of the continuum. So it's not necessarily the most least restrictive, but it's like in the middle. But oftentimes what ends up happening, this is from Think Inclusive, that website. So what ends up happening in this, how kind of inclusion will look, right? So you have all kids in an ICT class or a co-taught class. being sprinkled around, right? So it doesn't look like integration. So real co-teaching, you want it to look like inclusion and not integration. Integration is where you have the students with disabilities like at the back table or a specific table, and like the special educator is sitting next to those students. That's integration. But you want them sprinkled around the classroom so it looks like inclusion. Okay, so that is a bit of just the definitions of co-taught classes, right? So the positives, what are the positives into using co-teaching? You have various people in the classroom with their own expertise. So actually, I'm going to pull up a couple of articles because we definitely reference tons of research because that is definitely needed in education. Sorry, this is the one I want. Let me see. Okay, not this. Okay, so here we are looking at an article called Supporting Inclusive Science Classrooms. So this is an article talking about a co-taught class. I think it's first grade, and they use strategies to improve accessibility and engagement for students with exceptionalities. So this is a really good article that talks about how it explores a lesson on structure and function in an inclusive first grade class. There's a co-taught by a general and special education teacher, and the lesson describes how the teachers co-teach through team teaching. That's one of the co-teaching models that you can use in a co-taught class to plan for possible barriers and use universal design principles to ensure the lesson is accessible to all students. So really good article if you ever wanted to reference this. Great article for you to read. Also, we have another article that talks about some of the benefits. So this specific article, the teachers shared their specific expertise and had different points on how they made the lesson accessible to the students in the classroom. But this is another article this one is more practice-based, but here, this one is actually more research-based. So this is an article that basically talks about, it's a meta synthesis. So basically what the researchers did was did a broad-based data search using specific search terms. And they searched through different articles, I think probably over 1,000 with this one. And they use inclusion and exclusion criteria to figure out which ones are the ones that they wanted to research. So basically, they did a broad-based research article showing how does co-teaching look, and then also some of the benefits to co-teaching. So this is a really good article that you can use in research. It's a meta-synthesis of qualitative research, and it was conducted on co-teaching by general and special educators working with students with and without disabilities in primary and secondary general education classrooms. And these articles will be linked in the description box. So there was another big metasynthesis that was done on co-teaching by Scruggs et al. Published in 2007. And they wanted to update the research because we need to have updated research. And so they wanted to figure out the co-teaching's impact on students and teachers. So of course there are challenges to co-teaching, and that's going to be another video. But what they gleaned from the research was that co-teachers perceive that co-teaching can enhance their and their students' learning. Findings suggest that school personnel, researchers, and policymakers can consider co-teaching as a learning context for co-teachers, as well as dynamic framework that can potentially foster effective instruction for all students in the co-taught classroom. So it does have some huge benefits, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. So those are some articles that you can reference. Okay, so some of the other benefits, like I was saying initially, there are different people in the classroom that bring their own expertise, right? So if I'm like an artsy teacher, I, can decorate the classroom, and kids can do a lot of arts therapy or arts projects, right? I can incorporate arts into every single subject area or the subject area I teach, right? And if you have a teacher who's really strong in literacy, they can, definitely bring that expertise into the classroom, and then everyone will be reading and writing, tons of like books at the end of the school year, right? So everyone comes to the table with different types of expertise, right? So teachers can learn from one another and grow. So I have, of course, been in tons of really classes. I've observed thousands of co-taught classes, right? So this is my level of expertise. So there are definitely benefits and there's a lot of challenges, but teachers can learn from one another. Also, if it's done right, and I know right is subjective, but I will present some articles too as well. When done right, and I can suggest articles, definitely write down in the comments. When it's done right, using more of the small group co-teaching models like station teaching and parallel teaching, where teachers are simultaneously teaching, not just to the whole group, you're teaching to small groups, and whether they switch or they stay with half the class doing parallel or station teaching, where kids are rotating to different teachers and you're teaching a portion of the curriculum or the lesson, right, or the subject area, or you're teaching your own subject area in your stations, that can lead to higher achievement rates with kids, right? I have seen it, and I will be publishing things on this in the near future, but I have seen this work. So when teachers are simultaneously teaching, and if done right, students can learn a lot more. You can reach more students. You can cover more content with a smaller number of kids. I remember being in a classroom, I'm not going to say who it is, but it was a high school class, English. There were, I think, 3 teachers, 1 paraprofessional. Only the general educator was teaching. And yeah, there were 4 adults in a room and only 1 person was teaching. And yes, so needless to say, if people are simultaneously teaching, having small groups, teaching portions of the lesson or teaching the same lesson to their small group, you can move kids, because what sense does it make to have 4 or 5 different people in a room and only 1 person's teaching to the whole group? It doesn't make sense. Or even if you have 5 people teaching to the whole group, it's like seeing 1 person teaching. Trust me, right? So you need to do more of the smaller group co-teaching models. That will move kids. That's a huge benefit. Utilize the other people in the room. I've been in a classroom where you had a special educator and 7 paraprofessionals and only whole group instruction is going on. Why? You have so many adults in a room. Everyone can be having a kid. Everyone can have a group. Like, it doesn't make sense to just 1 person have the stage, right? That is a total benefit, having multiple people in the room. Sharing roles and responsibilities. Everyone should be co-assessing in a co-taught classroom, right? Definitely co-instructing, co-assessing, co-planning, all that, right? But I don't have the burden of organizing the classroom, decorating the classroom, buying everything for the classroom if I can have someone else do it, right? And share that responsibility. Like homework, we can, I grade half, you grade half of the homework, right? Teaching, copying, making copies, writing notes to parents. You could divide and conquer, right? Decorating, buying things, all the things. You can share roles and responsibilities, right? Also, let me just tell you, as a teacher, you have a bad bladder. Let me just ask you, I'm sure some of you are teachers who are watching me. Have you gone 12 hours without using the bathroom? If you are the only teacher in the room? Yes, I have done that. Even when I had people in the room co-teaching with me, you need to use the bathroom. But this is a great perk, right? You have someone else in the room, so you could leave the bathroom and go use it, right? Teachers hold their peace so much, right? So you can have someone else, in the classroom while you go to the bathroom. Also, smaller teacher to student ratio, huge, right? So if you have 32 kids in a room, divide the group into 2 parallel groups. You have 16, I have 16. That makes a huge difference. Yes, there could be noise. Yes, you don't have, there's only 1 Promethean board. You remember, we used to teach from chart paper. We used to teach from chalkboards. We used to teach from dry erase boards. You can use that in the room, right? You can break up a 35, 32, 25 person classroom, smaller teacher to student ratio. Students have more attention, right? Of course, it can be very dependent on that attention, but I'm trying to be the positive, right? We're trying to do positives here. Also, you can include different students with and without disabilities in the same classroom to share experience, knowledge, and it can make friendships and socialize. Oftentimes, when we're segregating kids, where you have students with disabilities are in separate classrooms by themselves or separate schools by themselves, you cut off friendship ties, you cut off experiences that they can have with their so-called typically developing peers, right? And vice versa, right? So you shouldn't be 40 years old in encountering a person with autism spectrum disorder at your workplace, right? That shouldn't be foreign to you. You shouldn't come across a person who has dyslexia by the time you're 25, right? You shouldn't come across someone who has emotional disabilities. If you're a cop, right? Or if you're, a teacher yourself, you shouldn't come across some people who may have disabilities as an adult. You should be coming across these people in pre-K, in kindergarten, in first grade, in second grade, right? Because everyone can be educated, right? If you have the right structures, every child can learn and every child wants to learn. Also, you have two people who can manage a classroom. This is so important, right? Because classroom management is the number one thing when it comes to teaching, right? You can have more than one person managing that room, more than one person co-instructing, co-reflecting, co-assessing, right? So co-teaching has great, great benefits, but I'm going to definitely talk about the negatives because there are some serious negatives in co-teaching. That will be another video. But thank you so much for listening. Like, share, and subscribe. And I will be seeing you for another video. Bye.